Got it, thanks.
Which cards are signed today?
I know, I just sent them a note.
Could be today or tomorrow. Could be. I'm gonna find out. Yeah.
Hold on, Josh.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, how are you?
How are you guys doing?
Okay, you?
Good. Good. Michigan. You went to Michigan Law School?
Yeah.
Actually, I got into Michigan Law School. Oh, when were you there?
God, did you have the clock still?
Oh, my God. You said Jason's usually good, I think. You know, this week.
I'll take this candidate.
You know those names?
Sure.
High school.
Jackie is busy, but she's not here.
Who else?
I usually have them and I don't have them.
I have to dig around and might find I have a candy. It's about the same.
I didn't go to
Doris, do you want a candy? I mean, cough drops.
I do.
They're just candy with.
Oh, yeah, that might, thank you.
So are eating ears.
Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to those who are live streaming. So, to thank those of you who participated in our bagels adventure, Flo Friedman sponsored bagels this morning in loving memory of her beloved husband, Barry J. Friedman. Thank you, Flo. We will not forget Barry, a wonderful guy. Yeah. And I do remember that when he worked with his father, they went out for lunch every day, and he bought him a fish sandwich, something like this.
Yeah, I think my father-in-law liked McDonald's fish sandwich. And Barry took him to work every morning with him, and they went out to lunch, and they got a fish sandwich.
That's great.
It's amazing that you remember
Oh, I
that.
do remember that. It's a good example of filial piety. Caring about your parents and grandparents. Yeah. Well, thank you. And the live streaming sponsored by Joan and Bob Lustig. Thank you so much. And Carol picked up this morning. Great. Got 3 for 3 right today. Hasn't happened that often. Okay, our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord, our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments and joining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so this morning, I kind of have fallen into the following mindset about Torah study. In the past, when we've done Torah portions of the week, I have felt obligated to do the portion for this week. And there's something to be said for that. Because, in this way we're in harmony with what the Jewish people around the world is doing, unless they're on a triennial cycle, which is another matter. And it gives each Torah portion equal weight. So we don't ask ourselves, is this a good portion? Should we skip it? So I think there's something very, very important about it. But I must say I've loosened my hold or grip on that particular dogma. And what we're doing is let's put it this way, always in the vicinity of the Torah portion. It's not that we're, getting farther and farther behind or ahead, but we're not, or at least I'm not feeling quite as rigid about it as I once did. And it gives us an opportunity to focus, give a little more focus to those elements, those parts of the Torah which deserve a little bit more attention. Now that I've heard myself say that, I'm going to question it a little bit. Because I always say to bar mitzvah families, you can't choose your Torah portion. The Torah leads us, not the other way around. And so we have to take seriously each and every portion. And as I've said over and over again, some of the best speeches I've had from kids over the years come from very unpromising Torah portions, which is kind of a vindication of that idea. On the other hand, I think we need to be a little looser about it and stay in the vicinity and not necessarily be so rigid about it. I'm going to be thinking about what I've just said on the assumption that there's still some problems in the idea. So,
You could call it partial light.
partial light. God. I'd be kicked out of the rabbinical assembly if I said that in public. What are you guys doing here at the temple in Cleveland? Well, Torah portion light. Yeah. Give us your license back. Michael?
Yeah, I was thinking there's also the question of which is the most, whether the Torah portion or half Torah is more interesting that week. But what I wanted to question you about, since you're a musical person, is there's a lot of debate amongst jazz musicians. How much do you have to return to the melody, or can you just constantly improvise? So it's a matter of, maybe that's another way of looking at it.
That's a very nice analogy. What right do we have to leave the basic melody behind? Doesn't the melody define the piece rather than we? It's kind of an exact description of a rondo, right? The rondo starts with a theme, it moves away, comes back, so it's A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, and so on, but it comes back. It often comes back transformed. Wow, gee. All right, I'm going to muse a little bit on this idea, because there are among theme and variations, two that are especially amazing. Bach's Goldberg variations and Beethoven's Diabelli variations. And here's what happens. Now the Bach, I think there are 30 variations, but Bach comes back to the main theme at the end, so that in a way it's cyclical, whereas Beethoven does not. Beethoven, the last variation, is another variation. I mean, it's close, but it's not a variation. So Beethoven's is linear, and Bach's is cyclical. And your argument, so to speak, or this argument, is that the cyclical does reflect fidelity to the theme, all being said and done. Whereas the Beethoven, it's interesting because one of the basic themes of 19th century thought is history. Hegel, philosophy of history, and even Darwin, evolution, moving forward. And Beethoven's Diabelli variation seems to be an example of that. It's linear, as if moving forward, whereas Bach's is more architectonic, more structure, more Gothic cathedral, symmetries, and so on. Well, yeah. I hope you know these two themes and variation sets. They're astonishing, are they not? Yes. One of the variations in the Beethoven, I think it's number 12, is basically the structure. It goes like this, da-da, da-da. It's as if he's eliminating everything but the architecture of the piece. So the Beethoven is quite unbelievable, really. He was asked, as were 30 or so other musicians, to contribute a variation on a theme that Diabelli himself wrote. And it's trivial and trite, the theme. And a lot of people contributed, Mozart among them. And Beethoven decided, maybe in the middle of a sleepless night, you know what, I'm not just giving him one, I'm giving him 30. And it is one of the great contributions of Beethoven, the Opus 120, I think, which is very, very late. And he spent 4 years on it. And the Bach, I mean, the story is that Goldberg had to read, is this right, to his patron in order for him, the patron, to be able to go to sleep. And what he did instead, or in addition, is play the piano. I've got this wrong, but something like that. Anyhow, the Goldberg variations, the Diabelli variations, they're astonishing. Stuart.
Mozart could not have written a variation on the Diabelli theme. He was dead.
Was he? I thought that he did, though.
Schubert, Liszt,
Okay.
and Chopin.
Okay, very good. Well, Beethoven wrote this in like 1820.
Yeah.
Now, but when was the Diabelli theme written? You think after Mozart died in what, 1870, 91?
Yeah.
It's written after. Okay, good, excellent. I'm not a believer in the afterlife, except when I need it. But here chronology intercedes. Thank you so much. Oh, you guys are great, you know. I go off on stuff and then, hey, wait a minute, you got this part of it wrong. Glad to be corrected. Okay, so as I said a week ago or so, we're dealing in the last 16 chapters of the book of Exodus, starting with Exodus 25, and there are 40 chapters, with what I'm calling here a chiastic structure. And a chiasmus comes from the Greek letter chi, where we can have A, B, B, A. If this is A and this is B, A, B, B, A, something like that. And a chiastic structure is of the form ABA, or ABCBA, or ABCDCBA. So it's got this triangular structure. And I'm suggesting that these last 16 chapters have the structure ABCBA, so that the A unit is repeated, although with variation. The B unit is repeated with variation, and the C unit stands alone in the middle. So a chiastic structure does a couple of things. One, it defines a unit. If I can say this unit is A, B, C, B, A, the two A terms are the envelope for what is in the middle. But it also points to that letter at the acme in the middle, which then rises to a particularly unique status without diminishing the A and the B. Okay? So a chiastic structure, there's a wonderful one in the first chapter of the book of Ruth, which I won't digress to do, but essentially what it is that the author thinks that Ruth is teaching God something about fidelity. That's what that structure might point to. In any event, so we have to define the A term, the B term, and the C term. The A term is the building of the tabernacle. The B term is Shabbat. The C term is the golden calf. So the ABCBA is building, the instructions for the building of the tabernacle, Shabbat, golden calf, Shabbat, implementing the instructions for the building of the tabernacle. So to be precise, it's A sub 1, B, C, B, A sub 2. They're both A, but one is a variation, or a difference on it. So chapters 25 through 31 is A. At the end of 31, we have Shabbat. If you look at chapter 31, beginning in verse 12, is Shabbat. At the end of all the instructions for the building of the tabernacle, going all the way back to 25. And verse 16 is a verse that we sing, V'shamru. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asod et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam b'rit olam. And that ends in verse 17 and a little tack on in verse 18. So, A, now B, here comes C, the golden calf, and to say it more precisely, the golden calf and its aftermath. So chapter 32 is the golden calf. In chapter 33, Moses begins to cajole the alienated God back into the process of the wandering in the wilderness. God has been alienated. So 33 and 34, Moses struggles to bring God back in, and God comes back in. Okay? So the C term is chapters 32, 33, and 34, what I'm describing as the golden calf and its aftermath. Chapter 35, back to B, 35 verse 1, Moses convoked the whole Israelite community. These are the things the Lord has commanded. On 6 days may work be done, but on the 7th day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, and so on and so on. Then verse 4, Moses said further to the whole community, this will take among you the gifts of the Lord, it was on crimson yards, and so on and so on. So the B term returns in the first 3 verses of 35. And then we have A again, building the tabernacle, which culminates at chapter 30 and chapter 40. If you want to go to chapter 40, the middle of verse 33, a new paragraph. When Moses had finished the work, in Hebrew, Vayachal Moshe et HaMalacha, at the end of the creation story, Vayachulu et HaShamayim v'et ha'aretz. Vayachal, he finished here. At the beginning of at the end of the creation story, Vayachulu, when they finished. Okay? This is one of the several allusions at the end of Exodus to the creation story, which makes Genesis and Exodus a kind of pair. We have the creation of the world, which forms a light and structure out of chaos. At the end of Exodus, we have the creation of the tabernacle, which brings form and purpose to the life of the people. Another creation out of chaos story, the chaos of the golden calf. Rashi's point, you remember from last week, that the story of the tabernacle comes after the golden calf as a kind of opportunity for repentance and return. And this as well. So we have the creation of the world, the macrocosmic creation, and we have the creation of the tabernacle, a microcosmic. And when we look at the tabernacle, I didn't bring the picture from last week, we see that it is a coherent structure in which God comes to talk to the people, and the people offer sacrifices to God. So not only is it a parallel, coherent structure, it also represents and reflects the covenant with the people. So the chaos of the golden calf, or we might say the chaos implicit in human nature, is now offered the antidote of the tabernacle in the wilderness, which is one way of invoking and implementing covenant. So aside from the details, there's a very elegant architecture here. And we have at the very end, now I'm here back in 40, when Moses had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God returns to the community in full through worship. Moses could not, notice it's not verbal prayer, it's the enactment of sacrifices. And people like Nachmanides yearned for the return of sacrifices which would require the building of the third temple. Words are cheap. Actions count. Love the Lord. Yeah. All right, I've said it. How about doing it? So in a certain way, this is the ideal form of worship, not verbal prayer, which is kind of a concession to the destruction of the temple. And if you really knew that the sacrifices were the main form of worship, you would hope for its recreation. It would be a problem, obviously. So when Moses finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses couldn't enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle, right? When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their various journeys. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. For over the tabernacle, the cloud of the Lord rested by day, and fire would appear in it by night, in view of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys. Okay? The cloud fills the tabernacle. The people, especially Moses, can't get in until called. We turn to the first verse of Leviticus. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Speak to the Israelite people. So God here in Leviticus now springs into action from the tabernacle, in which God does not reside. God tents. God comes there periodically. Because God is transcendent, he doesn't live in one place, but he visits. And so on. So Leviticus now is a continuation of Exodus, where God is now speaking in his immanence, in his presence to the people. So, back to our chiastic structure. The sea term, the golden calf term, now becomes, in a way, the pivot of the entire last 16 chapters of Exodus. Let's think about it just for a minute. A and B, I'm just going to use this language, maybe it's not the best language. The A and B terms are positive. Building the structure, observing Shabbat. The C term, the golden calf, is the negative. It's the underside. I might say it's a bow to realism and ruthlessly, because it exposes the people's variability, their fickleness, the difficulty the people have in staying with an idea through thick and here thin. And so with the idealism of the tabernacle and Shabbat, or I might say representatives of space and time, what else do we have? Everything, space and time. Everything exists in space and time, doesn't it, one way or another? Maybe that's not true. I'll think about it later. But the golden calf represents, in a way, given human nature, the inadequacy of the contributions in space and time. And human nature needs to be reckoned with. And that's one of the things that the Tanakh does. It reckons with human nature and tries to figure out how to create something stable and ongoing. So the golden calf, not only in terms of the chiastic structure, the C term alone, but in terms of one of the important motifs in biblical literature, represents a pervasive idea that the authors are continually wrestling with. So now let's turn to the golden calf. You can see how crucial it is. What would the biblical text, what would Exodus be without it? We had the people after they left Egypt crying out, we don't have enough meat, we don't have enough water. Oh yeah, they're petulant. But is human nature intractable? That's the question. A little petulance we can take. Is it going to be continuous? So the golden calf deepens the problem of human nature. So let's look at it. Chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain. Now there's a lovely midrash on this. Because in the Hebrew, it is Vayar ha'am ki voshesh Moshe. When the people saw that Moses delayed, voshesh, but the midrash breaks voshesh, bet, shin, shin, into two units, the bet and the shesh. Add a silent letter to the bet, aleph, bow, and you have the word come, to come. And shesh means 6. So the midrash reads this as follows. When the people saw that 6 o'clock had arrived, and Moses didn't come down the mountain. So the inference is, Moses said, I'm going to come back in 40 days, 40 nights. And I'm leaving at 6 o'clock, and I'll be back at 6. So Moses leads the people to be precise about it. It's an indication of their anxiety. You said you were coming back at 6, and 6 has already come, and you're not here. They don't think, well, 6 means 6:50. When I say to kids about a first draft of their bar mitzvah speech, I say to them, let's get a date by which you'll have that speech to me. Okay, March 23rd. And then I say to them, well, March 23rd means March 23rd, March 24th, March 25th. We're not being precise about it. When midnight strikes, I'm not going to say, where is that speech? 23rd means around the 23rd. Here the people, because I'm not anxious about it. I don't get worked up if it's not at my computer by the end of March 23rd. But the people are anxious. So it's a sign of the psychological situation in which we find the people. That's what's glorious about that midrash. I mean, they violate the plain meaning of the text in order through interpretation to say something important about the people's collective state of mind. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, come, let us make us a god who shall go forth before us. For that man Moses, and by the way, when we have the locution, that man Moses, it's often complimentary. As in chapter 11, when the Egyptians say, that man Moses is great. Here it's derisive. That man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So the people are anxious, and in their anxiety, they turn against Aaron and verbally against Moses. Aaron said to them, I mean, what's the status of a leader who has proven him or herself to those that the leader leads? We would think that the led would recognize that the leader has some fallibility, but basically the leader has served them very well. They turn on him immediately here. It's now 3 minutes after 6. And they've already turned on Moses and Aaron. Instability. for which we can't, it would be wrong to only blame the people for this. They're in a precarious situation. They've just come out of Egypt. They don't know when they're going to arrive at the promised land. They might want to go back, as some of them say, to a more stable situation. Their freedom may be restricted, but at least they have food at every meal. So we can't exactly blame the people because the situation itself is perilous for them. Aaron said to them, verse 2, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me. Remember, the Egyptians gave the Israelites, or the Israelites borrowed, I think is the word, gold and silver from the people. So there's the wherewithal to make the rings, the earrings, and so on. And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Now what's interesting here, really, do people really worship what it is they've made? Do they think that the calf is really God? One interpretation is that the calf is parallel to the cheruvim, those winged hybrid creatures who are attached to the lid of the ark in the Holy of Holies with outstretched arms, each to the other. There's another one there. And there they create the space in which God appears, so to speak. So it's the footstool of the deity, made of gold. So one commentator, I don't know whether you find this compelling or not, thinks of the golden calf as a replication of the cheruvim, providing a kind of platform to which God comes to the people. The God that they are talking about. Let's look at the Hebrew here. And they said, "Ela Elohecha," right? Not this, but these are your gods. They're in the plural. So one commentator makes the point that the ancients were polytheists, but not fetishists. They don't need many representations of the God. One is sufficient in order to represent the many gods in which the polytheists believe. So that this author is arguing that there are some deep parallelisms between what is proper, the building of the Mishkan, and what is improper, the building of the golden calf. For all the parallels, they differ. And what is the difference? The difference is the authority behind the imperative, build. For the Mishkan, it's God. For the tabernacle, it's God. For the golden calf, it's the people. So that the source of the building makes the entire difference. Are you following the orders? And often the distance here in our minds, we get the notion of the commandments. The commandments from God ought to be obeyed because of the source of them. When I create my own commandments, that, for all the profundity of what I'm commanding myself to do potentially, the source is inauthentic. So it's precisely, I think this is the implicit argument of this author, precisely because what is built in both cases is so similar one to the other that the difference can't be there. The difference has to be in the source of the activity. That's that argument. It's an interesting argument, isn't it? The people are idolaters, it's true.
Yeah.
But the source of the idolatry is the worship of self. Their own capacity to be the authors of their own rules. And, I think of Immanuel Kant, who is trying to replicate biblical religion in an Enlightenment mode. And what's the Enlightenment mode? Kant wrote a very famous essay called What is Enlightenment? And Kant's motto, so to speak, in Latin was sapere aude. Be your own legislator. You are the source of your own. The categorical imperative is generated from us. It's not received from above. So in this sense, Kant represents the Enlightenment's attempt to move the center of the world from God to self. Here comes the rise of the individual. Now, Kant is trying in this way to re-establish the authority of biblical religion, biblical law, but its source is from below and not from above. Maya, did you have a comment? Yeah.
First of all, to relate to it, if you go to the museum and go to the section of modern art or abstract art,
Yes.
people tend to say, well, it looks like a head or a face. So I think that the inherent quality of people to think abstract is kind of reflected here.
In what way? To see abstract?
That you cannot visualize a deity that has no shape or form. It has to be concrete. So I think it's kind of the same motif that it's not only ancient, it exists still today. But what I wanted to say is, and I don't know, I speak contemporary Hebrew, so I don't know what the sages made out of it. The Egel Masecha.
Yeah.
So Masecha is a mask in modern Hebrew. I don't know what they had, but I think that if you go with the mask, it implies that you have to make it into something tangible, and behind it is maybe the abstract. I don't know.
That's a very interesting point. So you're saying that we have a tendency to be unsatisfied with abstractions, and that
we need a concrete.
And we need to make it concrete. And for you, that, from this point of view of yours, this is one of the, an impetus for doing what the people do. They can't have an abstract God. They need to bring God down to size, so to speak. Interesting. Vivian?
We talk about the impatience of the people, but to me, this is such a political, the people are in political crisis of leadership. There's a crisis of leadership. Their leader has disappeared.
Right.
And how does Aaron get a pass as he doesn't step forth, but he steps forth with an alternative that is a mask or an abstraction or something to appease. I mean, don't you have a real conflict of leaders and leadership here? What are the people without leadership? I mean, isn't that also the question that arises here?
Oh, I think that's a great point. And politics is about power.
Yes.
So what power does each of these two people represent? And to be overly schematic about it, the source of Moses' power is from above. The source of Aaron's is from below. Maybe that's the difference between the prophet and the priest. The priest is serving the people. The prophet is serving God to the people. Now that's a little unfair. Let me say it differently. The priest is serving the people, is serving the people's serving of God. Because the worship is a serving of God, but it makes concessions to the people's needs. Rabbi, the service is too long. Well, look, God said, let's make it 4 hours. Yeah, but we can't handle that. Okay, we'll reduce it. I mean, that may be a little unfair. No, I think it's a very, very good point. And in Schoenberg's great opera, when Moses rebukes Aaron, Aaron says, well, look, the people are alone, and the people were frightened. Give them a break here. So this is a leadership which pays very close attention to what the people need. Moses tends to be a little remote from the people's needs. I mean, we'd have to do a little bit of an analysis of several passages to see if that's true. But I think you're right. Different kinds of leadership. This is a leadership crisis. I just happened to have brought, because I want to read something, from Michael Walzer, who's a political philosopher, his book Exodus and Revolution. I'm going to read something about Moses' leadership here. But Vivian, you raise a point that was on my mind too. Yeah, Stuart?
Is the golden calf story similar to the Tower of Babel story? The people of Babel want to build a tower. They are unique, or, pardon me,
Autonomous?
autonomous. Good word. Thank you.
Right, and you remember that's a very, very good analogy. That in the Tower of Babel story, the people, excuse me, want to make themselves a name.
Yeah.
Whereas in the next chapter, the call of Abraham, I will make you a great nation and give you a name, however it's said. That in Babel they make their own name. In the Abraham story, God is going to give a name to the people. So that's a parallel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, the Mishkan comes from above, the Tower of Babel, the golden calf from below, just as the Tower of Babel. What I like about your point, aside from the analogy, is that it's a reflection that this is a kind of theme that is on the author's or the editor's mind throughout.
Right.
And it has something to do with what's the best way to live a life? Through the exploitation, I mean that positively, the implementation of our own needs and desires, be true to yourself, or is it the service of something or somebody else? In the recent issue of the New Yorker, I don't know whether any of you have gotten it or do get it, there's a long piece on a philosopher at the University of Chicago, Agnes Callard, and one of her specialties is ancient philosophy, and Socrates is her hero. You could do a lot worse than that. And she raises the question in this article that the crucial question is, how should I live? That's Socrates' question as well. So that's a question here too, in a very powerful way. From where should I take my values? How should I understand my universe and my place in it? Namely, how should I live my life? Callard raises the question of aspiration. She wrote a book on aspiration, a very dense book, in which part of our education is to teach us to what to aspire. I would love to be able to enjoy the music of Arnold Schoenberg. I don't yet, but I want to. So it's not aspiring to a particular thing that I already kind of have in view. It's the aspiration to something that I don't yet have any feeling for, but want to. What kind of life should I aspire to? And here it's very binary, to just overly schematize it. Foundations from above, foundations from below. I mean, I could secularize it and say the Declaration of Independence
Right.
is my from above. I didn't make my own understanding of what America should be. I go to my foundational document. So it doesn't just have to be a theological issue. It can be an issue of autonomy or heteronomy. That's the issue. For Kant, heteronomy is taking your nomos, your law, from somewhere else. Autonomy is taking it from yourself. Autonomy, self-legislator. And do I take my standards from myself? Autonomy, is that the basic principle, or is it heteronomy from somewhere else? Parents, in the beginning of the life of a child, the child's view ought to be heteronomy. Learn from your parents. Let's hope the parents are enlightened and healthy enough to do it well. Michael?
So my question to you would be, what does this say about Soloveitchik's, three kinds of communities in Lonely Man of Faith?
Yeah.
The secular community,
Yeah.
we take our orders from the laws, or the congregational community, the people who are voting on whether they want a golden calf or a Tower of Babel, or whether we should do what we think we should do, or whether we should, and the religious community, and the leader of that religious community, who arguably ought to be able to have autonomy over how the worshiping goes on. That shouldn't be a democratic question. That should be decided by the religious leaders, right?
Yeah.
Do we follow one paragraph of the
Shema.
Shema,
V'ahavta.
Shema, or the V'ahavta, or do we do both paragraphs? I remember you debating that question. That should be for the religious leader to decide, not the government or a board of directors of a synagogue. So there's three communities. So how do we decide how to live our life? The way the rabbi tells us, the way the president tells us, or the way we decide democratically or individually?
I don't want to talk myself out of a job here, but yeah.
Just what I was thinking.
You want to know the image that has thrust itself into my mind? A baseball glove. What glove should I use? Let me try some out. Do I want a big glove, which gives me a greater opportunity to get the ball? Or do I want a smaller glove, more flexibility and more control? So maybe part of the answer is trial and error, learning from experience, what works. Not only from our experience, but from the collective human experience. I mean, that's why we study the past. I think it's a good, I'd forgotten the three communities in the Lonely Man of Faith. Soloveitchik does say in that thing over and over again, yet I am lonely. He's still feeling a sense of loneliness. Kierkegaard is a very important figure for him. You remember Kierkegaard went back and forth with Regina Olsen. I think he never married her. Ron. Then next.
Doesn't this raise an issue of free will?
Yeah.
And I've always looked at free will as being the inherent right, the God-given right, if you would, to decide between two given objectives or ends or dictates, which presupposes that there is the hetero dictate.
There is the what dictate?
The external dictate.
Okay.
Not the autologous, not autonomy. I can't choose between two things if they're not given to me
Okay.
for my choice. So the
I'm not-
aspect of free will comes into all of this,
Yeah.
I think.
What about the idea of freedom through bondage? Freedom through bondage. I choose to be led. I choose to follow the wisdom of my ancestors.
Fine. You have the right to do that or not.
Or not, for sure. But once I've chosen freedom through bondage, I've given up some freedom. Yeah. I would.
If you remain true to your choice, yes.
Well, that's true. I mean, a lot of people say, let's start this Friday night service at 6:30. Well, if they're going to come to the service, they have to go along with what somebody else has decided. But it's useful to do so because it gives them an experience of a worship service. Yeah, so there can be autonomy that leads to heteronomy, a desire, a choice that leads to being led. Yeah. Maida, you had a question, a point?
Well, mine unfortunately is not theological. It's more concrete, and I have two questions. One is, these are people who left Egypt in a hurry, gathered the first things they could. Where are they finding gold? And two is, why did they choose the image of the calf?
I think the calf, maybe it's a bull actually, comes out of Egyptian religion.
Yes.
So I think they have it from their experience in Egypt. We derive that not from our historical understanding, because it's hard to believe that they really were ever in Egypt, but from the story about Egypt.
So we're dealing just with the story. We're not really dealing with a concrete, this happened to our people.
Yeah, I mean, what's the problem there? Anna Karenina never existed.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Our novelists, our poets, give us a reality. Who is it? It's one of Yeats's poems that brings Agamemnon back in at the end. Which poem is that? It's one of the Babel. It's one of the Agamemnon never existed, except Agamemnon is real. It's true. Is Agamemnon real? You remember at the beginning of Strauss's opera Lecta, the Agamemnon theme. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, dear. He's hovering over that whole story, and therefore over our lives. Candy?
I have a baseball question.
Good. It's about time.
Because I think it's more appropriate to compare what the runner who's going around the bases has to decide. Well, should I run home from third base? Or should I take another base? Or is it time for me to go? Or do I have to listen to the third base coach? Or I don't know who directs those kinds of activities after a player hits the ball and then the second player hits the ball.
That's a very
Is
good
it
point.
individual or is it a team decision? And what should the individual runner do, pay attention to? His own feelings? I know I can get to home base.
Yeah.
Or to what the coach tells him to do.
You know what an algorithm is? An algorithm is a decision procedure. Can we arrive at a concrete answer to a specific question? And I think there's no algorithm for this. Let me just expand on that a little bit. How come we have spring training? How come we have coaches? Because there are do's and don'ts in general. And one of the do's is pay attention to the third base coach when you're rounding third. But if you do that rigidly, then you're likely to make a lot of mistakes, because you also count on the experience of the individual. Intuitions are things we develop through experience. That something feels right. Was it the 95 or the 97 series where Kenny Lofton was held up at third base by the third base coach and should not have paid attention to the coach, except at that moment he decided to be heteronymous because the coach had the view of the field where Kenny Lofton is rounding third. It would have been better, though we don't blame him for it. I mean, we blame the coach for making a bad choice. But Kenny Lofton at that moment took his cues from somebody else and not from his own his own intuition. So I think it's I think you frame it very nicely. We've got to learn some things, and we learn them from those who have experienced them, and there are experts. And we need to learn from experts, but they can't tell us what to do in every situation. That's the issue of judgment. Judgment is the application of a general principle to a unique situation. And we know that judgment can't be taught because it happens in the moment where you've learned some general things, and now all of a sudden you're confronted with a unique situation, and you have to know in what sense that general rule applies. And that's what you're talking about, but it's a combination of both,
So
isn't
is
it?
that Aaron's situation right now? Should he pay attention to what the people want, to their individual feelings? Or, because that's what he does.
What do you think?
Well, I don't think obviously, I don't think he made the right decision.
You do or don't?
And I don't understand why he gets a free ride, which is
Well, he gets
what you were
rebuked.
talking about, because it seems to me he was in a decision-making position. There's something that is just hokey about this whole golden calf story.
What's hokey
And
about it?
Because it's a story.
I don't think that Aaron, if he took his responsibilities seriously, would have gone through and gone along with this plan of the people. And I think he should have had more maturity to not do it and say, well, wait a minute, just hold off. Give him another 15 minutes, or
Here's
or
Moses.
something like that. And why would a good Jewish boy like that create a golden calf because a bunch of people wanted it? I mean, I know he didn't want them to revolt and all that, but that doesn't show very much leadership on his part.
I agree.
The way he gave in, and then is never
So
held
here's
accountable.
Moses and here's Aaron, and they've both heard what you've said. And Moses says, "Come over here, Candy, and stand with me." And Aaron says, "Hey, the people are in crisis. This is a people that is at the beginning of their adventure. And they're facing nature's privations. They're facing an unknown situation. They're facing enemies. They've been hit over the head with a bunch of laws, for crying out loud. And they're alone. Their leader is gone and has been gone. And God is an abstraction. Let's try to concretize this. The people haven't given up. They've just, well, maybe I want to take that back. And Aaron recognizes the need of the people. The child in bed cries out in the middle of the night. And the parent gets out of bed and goes to the child. And the parent does one of two things. Give them a bunch of abstractions. Everybody goes through this. Everything is going to be okay. Or does the parent sing a lullaby? Aaron is the lullaby. And Moses is severe. Moses has the truth, but he's impatient with compromise. Maybe that's why he doesn't get into the promised land. Because it's one thing to be on your way somewhere, it's another thing to have arrived. And once you arrive, you recognize there are problems that in your imagination you didn't fathom on your way. And now they're there. And do they need an abstractionist like Moses, or do they need a guy who is willing to lead the people in battle with a Torah strapped to his side? Meditate on it day and night in chapter 1 of Joshua. So I think a strong case can be made for Aaron. It's the lullaby theory of history.
I
From-
like the analogy a lot.
Yeah. Sue?
First of all, Agamemnon is mentioned in Leda and the Swan.
In what?
Leda and the Swan.
Leda and the Swan, excellent. That's great, yes. One of the great poems.
And second of all, I like the idea that Aaron is singing them a lullaby.
Yeah. It'll be okay in the morning. Let's try to make it through the night.
And it's early days in the development of the religion.
It's, right, exactly. It's still the state of nature, so to speak. Yeah. Scott? No, go ahead.
Okay.
No, oh, okay, Stuart.
The Bible is filled with stories of people who rationalize. From Eve saying, the serpent told me to do it.
To Abraham, Eve told me.
Yeah. So, Bible is filled with these stories.
And what's the meaning of that? It's hard for us to take responsibility,
Yes.
so we pass off the responsibility to somebody else. Is that part of the golden calf story? Well, in a way, Aaron does it.
Yeah.
Aaron says,
The people told me.
the people made me do it. Interesting. Scott?
So, okay, this is several people, including yourself, have mentioned that this was a crisis situation.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned in our Torah last night, in a crisis, one very good solution is to return to your roots. Now, their roots, even though they've recently had a very dramatic demonstration of who God is, their roots go back to probably an idolatrous either participation or at least an environment which you mentioned might be a calf, and so that may be their roots. Aaron may recognize that. He's got two crises. He's got, where is Moses, by the way? And how do I keep these people from revolting? Maybe half of them go back to Egypt. Maybe they fight amongst themselves. Maybe I can unify them here. And the way I can do that is the lullaby. I can pacify them. He even maybe delays a little bit there when he says, well, let's get rings together and all this, and get your earring from your children too, and find them and get all this. So he may be returning to what he recognizes are their roots to satisfy their stress, their anxiety.
And let me just add one thought to your really good thought. He's buying time
You may be, yeah.
by giving them what will pacify them. Because if we go on, we can make a case for this point, which we'll do in a second. So very. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. There was one other sidebar I wanted to make. A question Candy had about base running. To my baseball team, in my case, it's purely a matter of chance. Nobody, including myself, has any idea which direction I'm going to run. I pretty much get compared to Manny Ramirez in running.
Yeah. Always a bad analogy. Manny Ramirez was stopped in his car by a policeman to have a ticket, and when he pulled out, he made a U-turn right in front of the cop.
Oh.
So Manny Ramirez is not a good example. By the way, I'm going to resist what you're saying. It's not a matter of chance, because our experience has crafted our intuitions, which help us at the spur of the moment to make a decision. Don't you think that's right? Malcolm?
I think of the people and Moses and Aaron as all human. So to me, this is the impossibility of these two, or the wish to have both of these available, but the impossibility of having both pursuits satisfied. So the people would like to follow God, but God is not available, or not readily available. And Aaron is offering something. I mean, I bring it to even we talked about, so if all of the world followed the Word,
Follows what?
followed the Word of the Bible, we wouldn't have no need for a Declaration of Independence and no need for a Constitution. We would live in harmony. And that's the,
How dull would that be?
well,
Yeah.
Sometimes
that's
it's
what we created, and that's what Aaron created for us, because we can't reconcile these.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. Who was it? The mathematician, the incompleteness theorem. Who remembers this? What was the guy's name? Who said you can't have a system that is both complete and consistent. If you include everything, you're going to have inconsistency. In a way, he showed the impossibility of a logical system. That, in a way, is what you're saying. And I don't think that, I resist the point about if we only followed the Bible, we would have a harmonious society. If only the Bible itself were harmonious. Yeah. Because the Bible, what is that guy's name? Okay, and I want to get back to the text.
But don't we have to turn the corner on the calf to rightful building? I mean, that's where we get the foundation back. I mean, it's first the instruction, then wrongful building, then it turns. So there's a resolution to this crisis in the rightful building of the people.
Right.
So that's the Constitution.
Yes,
Or
yes.
the foundation, or whatever, whatever metaphor we want to attach to that. Right. That's such a complicated question. Let me just say a couple of things about it. First of all, it takes an enormous amount of effort to get back on track. Chapters 33 and 34 are Moses cajoling God back into the picture. Also, yes, we do have the building of the Mishkan and an orderly, and that's Leviticus. But don't forget that we can move ahead in the time of the judges when, after all, that political system is human power poor because the judges come on the scene for a purpose and they go out of business. Because only God is God. And therefore, you need in that system weak leadership until the people say, no, we need a king, and we need a temple, and we need a dynasty. So at what point has the Bible gotten to its proper order? Because there are many systems in the Bible. The rise of the monarch is not somebody's good idea. It's the chaos of the community that leads to it. So we're oscillating between order and chaos over and over again in search for the right system, and the Bible gives us a variety of options. Okay, Ron, and then we'll get back to the text.
How do the scholars and the commentators deal with Aaron's prevarication at 32:24?
Yeah.
We know earlier that he cast, that he melted the gold, he smelted it, and then he cast it in the form of whatever it was, a bull, a calf, whatever. And now he prevaricates and he says, they gave me the gold, I threw it in the fire, and out popped this calf.
Yeah.
As though it were not his crafting.
Yeah.
How do the commentators deal with that contradiction?
Look, I think in one and two ways. Aaron's the villain here, or let's have some sympathy for Aaron. This is, I think, clearly a pro-Moses passage. And it emphasizes or illustrates the tension between prophet and priest. That's to Malcolm's point about harmony. I mean, with they have different vocations and different sources for their truth, and I think this is a pro-Moses. And what I've been arguing a little bit here is that let's be kind to Aaron. He's in trouble here, and he's doing the best he can. And it's the peril of it's the peril of following the common culture, what the people want. I mean, any leader needs to have some sympathy for the people he or she is leading. If you don't admire the people, if you don't love the people, then to that degree you're not a good leader. If a young person came to me and said, I want to be a rabbi, what's the chief ingredient? I would say you have to love people. You can be the biggest scholar in the world, but if you're not serving in the sense of having a strong feeling for the people you're serving, then you can't be a good leader. I think Aaron maybe goes too far in that, but Aaron loves the people. Moses is severe. So Aaron prevaricates. It's very true. So let's go on here. It's been a very rich discussion, my goodness. So now we're back to verse 4. Then he took from them and cast it in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, now look at this, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Lord." So how can this be understood? Well, one way is Aaron has not gone over to the other side. He is not a polytheist. He's a monotheist, and he's biding his time. Let's try to hold the fort until Moses does return. Because I'm anticipating a normative activity, a festival to the Lord. Early the next day, verse 6, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifice of well-being, and they sat down to eat and drink and then rose to dance. Okay? So the tzachek, which has a variety of meanings. And one meaning that is often given to it is having an orgy. So they go crazy. You know, and if you know your Moses and Aaron opera, that's one of the high points of the opera, the orgy. Okay? The Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry down for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt." Who is trying to get out of responsibility here? What? You brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They've been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They've made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed it to say, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." The Lord further said to Moses, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be that my anger may blaze forth against them, that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation." Now, God has done this. This is a precedented action, right? At the time of the flood, God decided to destroy his creation and start again with a new guy. Then after the Tower of Babel, he decides to start again with Abraham and so on. So, you remember Bill Morris of blessed memory, he used to sit right there. He always said, God is learning as well through experience. This is God's adventure as well. So, I'm going to start again. But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, and now here Moses steps up to being a leader, doesn't he? "Let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against your people." Don't forget, God, this is your people. You don't get out of it that quickly. "Whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand." You know, actions have consequences. You freed the people. You've got some responsibility for them now. Well, you just can't get out of it the next day, let not the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Oh yeah. You think this is a great adventure that you brought the people out of Egypt. It doesn't need to be seen that way. It can be seen as a malicious attempt to get rid of this recalcitrant people. Because when you destroy them, as you're planning to do or thinking about doing, it will look to others. By the way, does your reputation matter to you? It will look to others that you were malevolent from the start. You brought them out in order to destroy them. It's not that you brought them out, and as it turned out in an unplanned way, you now want, no, cause and effect. There's a wonderful rabbinic passage that goes like this. There's this notion of, in Hebrew, kivyachol, as if we could say so. And here's the quote. If you believe in me, speaking to the people, I am God. If you don't believe in me, I am not kivyachol, as if I could really say this, not God. What's the point of that? God cannot make God's own case. If God came out of the clouds and said, look, now God is an idol, right? God has human features and it's a particular being and so on and so on. God is tied. God is restricted by God's very nature. Who is it that creates a sense of the power of God? Those who believe in God and worship God. We are the ones. So that Moses here recognizes, he's trying to tell God, that it's only through the people's willingness to follow you that gives you this reputation. If the enterprise doesn't work, it's as if either you're malevolent or never existed at all. That's Jonah's problem. The Ninevites have sinned. You're going to forgive them? Nothing is going to happen? Nothing's happening? It's as if there's no reward and punishment at all. If nothing happens, and I'm prophesizing Ninevites, and you forgive them, get me out of here. I don't want to be your prophet. So there's something about God's reputation, how God is seen on earth by both God's followers and those who have seen. The Song of Moses, I think, at the end talks about the Philistines, which is much into the future, but it's as if that splitting of the Red Sea has now become known throughout the ancient world, which elevates God's prestige and reputation and gives God now a background, a warrant to command. So, and notice how condescending Moses seems to be. Don't you care about your reputation? But there's something powerful there. Let not, verse 12, the Egyptians say it was only with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish the people. Argument 2, you bound yourself in a relationship. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, God doesn't need to put God's hand on the Bible. I take an oath. God just needs to say, this is what I intend to do. God's behind the Bible. God is the true Bible, so to speak, get the point that I'm making. You swore by yourself. You promised. And said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever. You bound yourself in a covenant. So Moses is quite astonishing here. He raises 2 very powerful arguments to dissuade God. The question is Moses teaching God, or has God summoned Moses to try to offer arguments to a God who already understands them and doesn't need to be educated, just to see whether Moses is up to the leadership challenge. And we see that possibility right here in 10. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them. Was Moses bothering God, that God had to say, don't bother me? This is an invitation, according to some commentators. This is an invitation to Moses to argue with God as a sign of his leadership, if he succeeds in doing so. So one could say that Moses teaches God. The other might be God knows this and is just seeing whether it seems like a test of God, but it could be seen, now let me be, as a test of Moses. I don't know which one to choose, and the plain meaning is it's a test of God, right? And the Lord renounced the punishment he had planned to bring upon the people. Thereupon Moses, and the thereupon is a rendering of one little letter, the vav here. Vayifin, vayered. But the translator has a good point here. Moses has accomplished this task of trying to keep God from extricating himself, from leaving the process. God is still in the process. I did it. Now Moses is going to take care of the next thing, because Moses is ticked off as well. But first he has to mollify God. Having done that, he can now express his own anger. Thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain, bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, tablets inscribed on both their surfaces. They were inscribed on the one side and on the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing, incised upon the tablets. And we've talked about writing before. So these are the little intimations of the need to write these things down. Some of it is happening right here explicitly. When Joshua heard the sound of the people and its boisterousness, he said to Moses, "This is a cry of war in the camp." But he answered, "It's not the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of it. It's the sound of song that I hear." A very equivocal, controversial interpretation. But in any event, there's rioting, there's chaos. As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged. And he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it, ground it to powder, and strewed it upon the water, and so made the Israelites drink it. A kind of ordeal here. You remember in Numbers chapter 5, we have the suspected adulteress who has to drink a particular potion, water mixed with dirt and so on. And if her belly distends, she's guilty, and if it doesn't, she's innocent. So it's an ordeal through water. And that evidently is what Moses is doing as well. And Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" And he said, "Let not my Lord be enraged. You know that this people is bent on evil." So it's an interesting claim. So Aaron is passing the buck too, isn't he? The people made me do it. Sort of the Flip Wilson view of Aaron. Remember, the devil made me do it. They said to him, "Make us a god to lead us, for that man Moses who brought us from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So I said to them, "Whoever has gold, take it off." They gave it to me. I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf. Gosh, I had no intention, and it just happened. That's Ron's point about prevarication. Moses saw that the people were out of control, since Aaron had let them get out of control. See, this is the evidence for the anti-Aaron view of this particular passage. So that they were a menace to any who might oppose them. Moses stood up in the gate of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come here." And all the Levites rallied to him. And he said to them, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, each of you put sword on thigh, go back and forth from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay brother, neighbor as kin and kin. You may remember back in Genesis 34, is it, the Dinah story, when I can't remember the name of the group, wanted Dinah, and the brothers said you have to be circumcised in order to get her, and then the Levites go out and kill all of those people. So there is a thread here that the Levites, before they became connected to the worship, were an aggressive, bellicose group. And here Moses calls on them, and evidently they're willing to kill their own family. This is the notion of solving your problem by killing all the dissidents. Let's get rid of the dissidents, and then things are going to be okay. The Levites did as Moses had bidden, and some 3,000 of the people fell that day. And Moses said, "Dedicate yourselves to the Lord this day, for each of you has been against son and brother, that he may bestow a blessing upon you today." This may be a prologue to the elevation of the Levites in terms of their status. The next day Moses said to the people, "You have been guilty of a great sin." The reason I brought the Michael Walzer, and I won't read it, I'll just summarize it, maybe next week we'll do it, is that Walzer thinks that this is a very powerful moment in the history of any people. And one of the things he does in Exodus and Revolution is he uses this story as a kind of paradigm for how to understand subsequent history of religious strife. And he points out that Moses tries the killing of the dissidents, and he recognizes, this is Walzer's point, that that won't solve the problem. What solves the problem is education. And education is a gradual process. So it's at this point, before God comes to the moment, that Moses sees that the trip to the promised land will be of necessity a long process, because education takes time. You can't just kill the dissidents, you have to teach them. So that for Walzer, Moses' great achievement is the 40 years in the wilderness. It's not punishment, it's the recognition of what finally gets ideas and passions into the mind and hearts of the people. This is a brilliant book, and I think that's a very good point. Let's just go on a little bit. The next day, Moses said to the people, I'm in verse 30, "You have been guilty of a great sin, yet I will now go up to the Lord. Perhaps I may win forgiveness for your sin." So here Moses is rising increasingly to his role as a leader. He's mollified God, and he goes down and he expresses anger for himself and on behalf of God as well. And now he's going to try to bring God back into the process, and not just by a reluctant concession. Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people is guilty of a great sin in making for themselves a god of gold. Now, if you will forgive their sin," and notice in brackets, "well and good." One commentator says that Moses is halting at this point, and he's trying to put together some way of speaking to God. So he doesn't know how to continue. In the text, it's now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, erase me. So it's an if without a then. And so there's some moment here when Moses is experiencing some emotional blockage. Gary?
What does he mean by erase me? It seems like an odd statement. Does that, I mean, for example, does that mean I quit?
Well, I think it may be seen metaphorically, it may be seen literally, because there's a notion in the ancient world that there's actually a book in heaven, the book of life, in which we are written. And we use that, right, on Yom Kippur. But erase me from the book, I think, can be taken literally, given that idea that once you're erased from the book, it's as if you don't exist. So I think it can be taken literally. Or it can be just a plea for, listen to what I'm saying here. But Moses seems to be saying to God, look, I mean, you want me to be a leader, you'll listen to reason here. If not, you can erase me or I'm going to be gone from the situation. So in a way, it's another challenge to God. If you will forgive their sin, ... but if not, erase me from the record which you have written. You have somebody else, God, that can take my place? I mean, I thought you chose me because of what you found in me. But the Lord said to Moses, he who has sinned against me, him only will I erase from my record. So God reduces the consequences just to the sinners. Go now, lead the people where I told you. See, my angel, and the word in Hebrew is messenger, malach, who aren't these little guys with wings. See, my angel shall go before you. But when I make an accounting, I will bring them to account for their sins. Why this intermediary? I think the reason is God has not been fully mollified and needs to be talked back into the ongoing covenantal process. And this is what happens in 33 and 34. But when I make an accounting, I will bring them to account for their sins. Then the Lord sent a plague upon the people. God is hardly fully reconciled for what they did with the calf that Aaron made. I just love the ending. I mean, you want a happy ending to a bad story? Well, it's not going to happen in the Bible easily or overnight. It's going to take a process, because that's not the way things work. Okay, let's stop. We'll continue next week with 33 and 34. Really remarkable chapters in so many ways. So, okay, I've got to run, so I can't really talk after. Shabbat Shalom.
How did they get that book? Well, now that you read it, it's apocryphal story. It's a story.
Well, it's apocryphal in the sense of the connection of the story to history. One can ask, is it a coherent story? And if there's no way of understanding where they got the gold, whatever happened didn't happen in history. The Bible here has a gap that is a problem. And that's why we can refer back to chapter 11, where the Egyptians give them what it says. So the story remains coherent. Well, I mean, in other words, it doesn't need to be historical to be a powerful and coherent story.
Now that for me, the story, and it never was anymore.
Okay, good. Well, good. It begins to converge on history a little bit later when we have non-biblical documents.
then it doesn't.
Or this thing is all over.
And then Carol,
What do you want?
it's a privilege.
And 49. I went to the manager place. I had 2 tablets in my hand. I saw, I saw sin Lord our God. Every time I took the tablets and drink the I threw myself for the Lord, eating over and drinking before, because of the great war I committed. For I was been read for 14 years and against you. We turned to life. Moreover, the Lord was angry with Aaron to have destroyed him. So I also interceded for Aaron after This is Moses. Yes. So maybe
That's the thing.
Between the deliveries and people procrastinate now.
and we have 180.
So then there were 80.
Oh, this.
Wonderful hours.
So I know he wasn't there.
Then I took some. Well, you took some.
Yes.
Electricity.
Right. Well, I heard don't go to work. No, right. And your mother, right, and there were,
And there were.
well, okay.
I don't know.
Whatever that
Well, they were well.
we also ran into, so I don't know.
Easy example.
I think it's going to be
You're arguing
I mean, my disagreement over all of this will go on. I don't have it one person. I don't have it. But on the test, right, free.
That was the one that
He's got a point too.
federal plan. Somehow she got
All kids.
the woman. It's all that knows, so I talked to her. So is that drugs?
Well, but there's also, and then this love it. People who hear about it love it. But the other,
My only suggestion would be to make it remind I don't know if they were, I don't know what, like, I did it 2 months. If you get an email, don't blame me. I mean, when you call them and they say,
Don't sorry.
I have,
like 30 people.
I understand, no question. I don't know if it's worth trying 1 more year. I know, if there's a blessing in it works.